I'm 49, and that night, he left saying he'd be in a meeting until late. Minutes later, my phone vibrated with a livestream notification from a downtown bar. I opened it on impulse and saw him on the screen, relaxed, glass in hand, without the tense expression of work. His laughter burst through the headphones, and it wasn't meant for me. Beside him, a woman leaned toward him as if she knew a secret. Someone's phone camera panned around the room and for a few seconds stopped right at their table. I saw her fingers brushing his shoulder, the synchronized toast, and an intimate look that no corporate agenda could explain. The stream chat was buzzing with comments about Free Friday, and I captured the screen with the time stamped on it. I also saved the audio, because I've learned that proof speaks when excuses fail. There, the word meeting collapsed like a poorly staged stage set. I didn't cry or call him. I took a deep breath and let my anger become the focus. I closed the live stream, reviewed our last conversations, and created a folder with screenshots, receipts, and schedules. My heart ached, but my head felt as cool as a hospital room. I needed to understand how long that alternate version of our lives had existed. And an even clearer clue was about to appear. I closed my eyes and remembered the beginning, when everything seemed perfect. He made me laugh with little jokes, hugged me in the kitchen while the coffee brewed, and told me I was his peace amidst the chaos. The good morning messages were routine, almost a sacred ritual. I believed in that man like someone who believes in a safe haven. And for a long time, he truly was. Memories came back in flashes, like scenes from an old movie. The surprise trip to the mountains, the dinner where he ordered wine just to please me, the plans to grow old side by side. I wasn't naive. I'd seen betrayals all around me, but I trusted that with me, it would be different. He convinced me with simple gestures, and I wanted to believe. We always want to believe what nourishes the heart. In our daily lives, we had our home routine. Rushed weeknight dinners, unfinished TV series, Sundays spent grocery shopping. It was common, but it was ours. I felt safe in that environment, as if the walls of our home shielded us from any external danger. But little by little, invisible cracks began to appear. And I, without realizing it, was already walking a razor's edge. The first changes were subtle but unmistakable. He started overdressing for trivial meetings, choosing different perfumes, spending more time in front of the mirror. He said it was work pressure, but the justification didn't support the details. I watched silently, trying to stifle my distrust. But every detail was like a spark igniting within me. One night, he came back saying he'd been to the gym. He was wearing super clean sneakers, an impeccable t-shirt, and a sweet perfume I'd never smelled on him before. I smiled as if I hadn't noticed anything, but inside, my stomach churned. I lay beside him, pretending to sleep, just to smell the scent lingering on the pillow. Doubt was beginning to suffocate me. I tried to push those thoughts away. I kept telling myself that he was my longtime companion, that he would never hurt me. I talked to friends, but ended up defending him, saying they were exaggerating. Deep down, I wanted to protect myself from the pain the truth would bring, because knowing is like walking through a door of no return. And I wasn't ready to walk through it yet. Even so, something inside me was awakening. His every gesture became a secret code I needed to decipher. The way he hid his phone in his pocket, the way he deleted notifications too quickly, the way he hid his smile when he looked at the screen. I could no longer live without noticing. It was as if my life had become a silent investigation. Once, I picked up his unlocked phone from the table. My hands trembled, but I couldn't open anything. The fear of confirming my suspicions paralyzed me. It was as if I preferred living with doubt to facing certainty. I left the phone where it was, but that moment left a lasting impression on me. I realized I no longer trusted him, and that was the biggest proof of all. He, on the other hand, seemed comfortable, as if he were certain I'd never find out. He'd say rehearsed phrases when he arrived late. The meeting ran late. Traffic was crazy. A client asked to extend dinner. I smiled and responded mechanically, but my heart pounded. With each excuse, a piece of our story broke. I began piecing together fragments like collecting puzzle pieces. Schedules that didn't match. Clothes different from the ones he wore when he left. Stories poorly told. Even the car smelled of perfume that wasn't mine. Everything seemed to scream, but I still tried to silence it. I wanted irrefutable proof, something that would leave no room for doubt, and it wouldn't be long in coming. The cruelest thing was the way he treated me. sometimes affectionate, sometimes cold, always leaving me confused. When I considered questioning him, he'd call me paranoid and laugh as if it were all just my imagination. This strategy hurt me more than any suspicion, because it made me question myself, not just him. I'd spend sleepless nights trying to gather my strength. Sometimes I'd stare at the ceiling, wondering if the woman next to him knew he was married. Other times, I'd wonder if he truly loved me, or if he'd already erased me from his life. These questions swirled inside me like a whirlwind, and his silence only increased the noise inside my mind. Our household routine was no longer the same. I'd make coffee, and he'd rush downstairs, always late for something that was never explained. When he sat with me, he'd hold his phone in his hand, responding to quick messages and smiling at the screen. I'd observe silently, memorizing every detail like someone filming a crime scene. I already knew. Something was hidden. I began to become an expert at observing. Every delay, every change of clothes, every excuse. I began to take mental notes, as if I were writing a report. It wasn't just intuition anymore. It was method. I knew the truth would reveal itself sooner or later, and when it did, I would be ready to face it. He couldn't imagine the strength growing within me. With each lie, I grew colder, more calculating. It was as if I were creating an invisible armor. I no longer cried in front of him, no longer asked for explanations. I just watched, silently. Because I've learned that silence is the sharpest weapon against those who think they can manipulate. I remember one night in particular. He left, saying he was going to an important meeting. Minutes later, a notification appeared on my phone. Someone was broadcasting live from a bar. My heart raced. I clicked on the video, and within seconds, everything I suspected began to be confirmed. The scene I saw changed my world forever. There he was, sitting at the table, relaxed like he hadn't been at home in a long time. His laughter echoed loudly, free, as if life were perfect. Only it wasn't for me. Beside me, a woman leaned against me, toasted, and smiled back. And for a few moments, it felt like I was watching a parallel version of my life. The live stream showed cruel details. Hands touching, the complicity in their eyes, the intimate atmosphere in public. I held my phone steady, recorded the screen, captured images. There were no more excuses, no more room for paranoia. It was raw betrayal, broadcast for anyone who cared to watch. My heart raced, but I didn't cry. I felt anger rise like fire, burning inside. But my face remained still, because, in that moment, something greater was being born. The decision not to be a victim. I took a deep breath and understood that the game had changed. The proof I'd been waiting for was there, raw and relentless. Now, it wasn't just distrust. It was reality, stamped before my eyes. And, as much as it hurt, it gave me clarity. I knew I couldn't go back, that from that moment on, nothing would be the same. The story I was living was about to transform into something else, and I was ready to turn the page, even if I didn't yet know the weight of what was to come. After the live stream, I sat on the edge of my bed with my phone in my hands. The room seemed to spin, but I forced myself to take a deep breath. The pain was so great it burned inside, but with it came a strange clarity. I had seen enough to no longer have any doubts. What had once been suspicious now had a name. Betrayal. I spent the night awake, rewatching the images over and over. Every detail became more cruel. His smile, the complicity in his gaze, the almost rehearsed touch. It was like watching a play where I wasn't the protagonist, but the deceived spectator. My heart pounded, but I didn't let a tear fall. I didn't want to give him that power. In the silence of the early morning, I began to reflect on the past few years. How many times had I closed my eyes to obvious signs? How many excuses had I accepted just to maintain the appearance of a stable relationship? It was as if all my effort had been used against me. The trust I'd sustained for decades was now in ruins. I decided not to confront him immediately. I needed more proof, more pieces to the puzzle. The live stream was undeniable, but I wanted to understand the depth of the deception. How much of our life was true and how much was a lie. Silence would be my weapon, and I would learn to use it precisely. The next morning, he arrived with a tired smile, saying the meeting had been exhausting. He kissed me on the forehead and ordered coffee, as if nothing had happened. I stared at him for a few seconds, almost hypnotized by his ability to pretend. I poured the cup, and something inside me said, "You're not the same woman you were yesterday." As he talked about spreadsheets and clients, I could only hear the echo of his laughter on the live stream. The contrast was unbearable. His coldness, mixed with my silent pain, created a surreal scene. I was there, physically present, but in spirit I was already elsewhere, in the realm of investigation. I developed the habit of checking for small traces I'd previously ignored. The clothes thrown in the hamper, the Uber times logged in the app, the quickly deleted messages. I became attentive to everything, like a detective in my own home. And the more I observed, the more certain I became. He wasn't just unfaithful, he was also an excellent actor. I began photographing forgotten receipts in my pocket, jotting down schedules and creating a mental dossier. It wasn't obsession, it was self-preservation. Because I knew that when the confrontation came, I needed to be prepared. The live stream was just the beginning of a much greater truth, and I felt there were still hidden layers, ready to reveal themselves. The most painful part was facing the moments when he still tried to be affectionate. A sudden hug, an out-of-context compliment, an attempt at closeness. To any other woman, it might have sounded convincing. But to me now, it was just a disguise, a slap over a gaping wound, and I was no longer willing to accept fake bandages. At night, when he fell asleep, I watched his breathing. It seemed peaceful, almost naive. Meanwhile, my mind raced, connecting clues, replaying details. I wondered if he dreamed about her, if he laughed like that even in his sleep. This doubt gnawed at me more than the scene itself, because it showed he no longer belonged to me. His phone became my primary target. It wasn't easy. He was careful. But I realized there was a loophole: the synchronized smartwatch. A notification flashed and revealed a strange address, different from our everyday life. My heart raced. I knew I needed to confirm. This was more than a slip-up. It was a pattern. At work, I feigned normalcy. My colleagues had no idea of the storm raging inside me. I smiled, attended meetings, but inside I felt the weight of carrying an unbearable secret. It was like living in two dimensions, the public, serene, and the private, in ruins. And I knew this division couldn't last forever. In moments of solitude, I wondered if I was somehow to blame. Had my dedication to routine, to work, to family, driven him away? But I soon realized this guilt was a reflection of his manipulation. Because no perfume on my coat or laughter on a live stream could be justified by the absence of affection. Betrayal is a choice, not a consequence. Good memories began to mingle with the bitterness of discovery. Every trip, every gesture, every promise seemed to have been tainted. I wondered, at what point did everything become a lie? Or had it always been this way and I hadn't wanted to see it? These questions hurt more than the images I had saved on my phone. I also felt my body reacting. Insomnia, a racing heart, trembling hands when I heard notifications. It was as if my mind were on constant alert. But at the same time, a strange force was building within me. I didn't want to be just a victim. I wanted to turn this pain into power. I decided my silence would be strategic. He didn't deserve to know I already had proof. He didn't deserve to see my tears or hear my questions. I wanted him to believe he was still deceiving me. Because the fall is much more painful when you fall from a high place. And I was preparing the ground for this. Every time he left, I felt a mixture of relief and despair. Relief at not having to face the lie right in front of my eyes. Despair at imagining what he was doing to her. Imagination is cruel, creating scenes even worse than reality. But this time, I wouldn't leave room for doubt. I would seek the complete truth. There was one night when he left his phone charging in the living room. The screen lit up, and for a few seconds I saw her name. My heart froze. I didn't need to open anything to understand. That was the silent confirmation I was missing. I took a deep breath, mentally registered it, and another piece of the puzzle fell into place. Now, I was no longer the same. I wasn't the woman who believed in easy excuses. I wasn't the wife who kept quiet to keep the peace. I was a wounded woman, yes, but also prepared. His betrayal had made me stronger. And that strength would still be used at the right time. I knew the definitive revelation was approaching. That soon I would have before me not just fragments, but the whole picture. And when that happened, nothing would save him from the consequences. Because no lie lasts forever. And I was ready to tear off his mask in front of the world. From the moment I saw her name on the screen, everything changed inside me. She was no longer just a suspicion. She was concrete, palpable, inevitable. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it was about to burst from my chest, but my mind remained cool. I knew that detail had opened the door to a world he never wanted me to enter. And now there was no turning back. I began to see every time he left as an opportunity to investigate. I wrote down times, cross-referenced information, compared excuses with the places he mentioned. It was as if I'd become an expert in domestic espionage. An ordinary woman, transformed into a detective by grief. And with each note, the truth came ever closer. The most frightening thing was his calm. He'd come home as if he'd lived through any other day, lie beside me as if nothing had happened. I watched every movement, every breath, every averted glance. He believed his own deception, and that made him even more dangerous. Because those who believe too much in lies expose themselves without realizing it. I began using strategies I never imagined I'd have the courage to use. I checked hidden credit card statements, looked at crumpled receipts in the trash, tracked ride-hailing schedules, all with the coldness of someone who knows they need more proof. It wasn't enough to know. I wanted to hold something he could never deny. One afternoon, he said he was going to a meeting out of town. I got in the car and drove to the location he'd indicated. I waited on the street for over an hour, and there was no sign of him. Minutes later, a social media notification arrived, photos from an event in another neighborhood where he was smiling. And once again, he wasn't alone. The shock hurt, but it also strengthened me. Each confirmed lie was a brick removed from the wall that held me captive. And I began to see beyond the excuses, beyond the theatrics. I discovered that the truth, even cruel, frees more than any comfortable illusion. And within me, a determination grew that I had never felt before. When he returned that night, I already knew everything. But I remained serene, as if I hadn't seen anything. I prepared dinner, listened to his stories, and smiled at the right moment. But inside, I felt like an actress playing the most difficult role of my life, feigning ignorance while hatred and pain burned silently within me. This mask I began to wear became my shield. He believed he was still deceiving me, and I allowed it. Every gesture of his was another chapter written in the dossier I was assembling. There was no rush because I knew the end would be devastating, and I wanted him to be caught, not just by me, but by everyone who believed in his image. The nights grew longer. I lay down, but I didn't sleep. I tossed and turned, staring at the ceiling, remembering the scenes I'd collected. The live stream, her name on his phone, the inconsistent schedules, the suspicious locations. Everything formed a web of lies, and I was the only one who saw the whole picture. I couldn't go back to being blind. With each new clue, my indignation grew. But along with it, a sense of justice also grew. I no longer wanted to just know. I wanted to expose. I wanted the world to see what I saw, for no one to believe the farce he'd constructed for years. And above all, I wanted to free myself. Free myself from the burden of living alongside an imposter. I began planning small traps. Loose comments, indirect questions, casual observations. I wanted to see how far he would go to sustain the act. And, incredibly, he didn't suspect. He responded naturally, lied with conviction, and smiled as if everything were under control. Little did he know that every word was registered in my memory like ammunition. My life became a sequence of cinematic scenes. I imagined myself in a thriller, where every detail could be the key to revelation. The hint of perfume, the untimely call, the fixed gaze on the cell phone. I no longer saw my husband. I saw a character trapped in his own lie, and I was the silent audience about to applaud the outcome. At times I almost gave in. I almost asked, almost confronted, almost screamed. But I held back, because I realized that patience is the most lethal weapon. I wanted him to feel safe, untouchable, until the downfall was inevitable. Revenge, I discovered, is built in silence. And his silence fueled me. One day he left in a hurry, saying he needed to take care of something urgent. I waited a few minutes and called a mutual friend. I discovered he was at a restaurant a few miles away. I got in the car, parked at a distance, and watched through the window. There he was once again with the same woman. And the scene was even more intimate than the live stream. My body trembled, but I didn't get out of the car. I didn't want a hasty confrontation. I just took quick photos with my phone, enough to dispel any lie. The knot in my stomach was unbearable, but with it came a sense of victory. Because now I had more irrefutable proof in my hands. When I got home, he still hadn't returned. I entered silently, sat on the couch, and looked at the photos. My heart was broken, but my mind had never been so clear. I knew his downfall was near. And for the first time in a long time, I felt in control. Fate seemed to be conspiring in my favor. In the following days, he exposed himself even more, relying too heavily on his own lie. Every gesture, every exit, every excuse was another piece on the board. And I, patient, just watched. I knew that soon the curtain would fall and the audience would see the truth. I began to prepare myself psychologically. It wouldn't just be a confrontation, it would be a turning point in my life. I didn't just want to catch a traitor. I wanted to free the woman who still existed within me, hidden under years of misplaced trust. And that woman was about to be reborn. Deep down, I felt that the greatest revelation had yet to come. That the evidence I had was strong, but not definitive. There was something bigger to come, something that would change everything forever. And I was ready to witness this final chapter. Because when the truth came out, there would be no escape for him. That week, I realized my body no longer reacted as it had before. There were no more tears, only a growing coldness. I walked through the house and every corner seemed to hold a hidden secret. The living room where we watched movies, the bedroom where we shared dreams, the kitchen with the smell of fresh coffee. Everything was now the scene of a carefully staged lie. I began to look at him as if he were a stranger. His stories, once compelling, were now poorly rehearsed scripts. The way he fiddled with his cell phone, the way his eyes avoided mine, the rush to leave the house. Nothing felt natural anymore. It was as if I were married to a character, not the man who once promised to love me. The days became a succession of heavy silences. He talked about work, about commitments, about fatigue. I responded with short, cold, calculated sentences. The tables had turned, but he didn't realize it. He continued to believe he was in control, when in fact I was the one writing the script. One night I decided to follow him. My heart was pounding, but my hands were firm on the steering wheel. I kept my distance, watching every turn he made, until he stopped in front of a discreet hotel with a dull facade. The shock was like a knife, but at the same time it brought a sharp clarity. I hadn't imagined I would have the courage to face that. I waited in the car, hidden, and watched as he entered with me. The hug was brief, but enough to destroy any doubt. My chest burned, but my mind recorded every second. I noted the time, the location, even her license plate. The betrayal now had a fixed address, no longer just an innuendo. When I returned home, the loneliness weighed more heavily than ever. I sat on the dark sofa, my hands shaking, and stared at the photos on my phone. It was painful, but also liberating. Each image took me further away from the deceived woman I had been. I was closer to the woman who would face the truth without fear. In the following days, my strategy changed. I didn't just want proof, I wanted preparation. I began saving money, organizing documents, planning every step. It wouldn't be an empty confrontation, but an act of liberation. I knew I needed to protect not only my heart, but also my future. He, on the other hand, seemed more confident than ever. He'd come home whistling, carelessly checking his phone, smiling to himself. His arrogance was what irritated me the most. How could I believe he'd never be discovered? Little did I know I already had everything I needed to turn things around. I remember a family dinner where he acted like the perfect husband. He toasted, told jokes, and praised my cooking in front of everyone. I smiled on the outside, but inside I felt disgusted. Every word he said was a staged lie to maintain his facade. And I, with my mask on, pretended to believe him so as not to arouse suspicion. The messages on my phone became even more frequent. I didn't need to read them to know their content. His smile betrayed it. The lost look in his eyes, the quick tapping of his fingers, the rush to hide the screen. It was like watching a lovesick teenager. But the teenager wasn't innocent. He was a married man toying with my dignity. Time became my ally. The deeper he sank into his own lies, the more evidence he left in his wake. I just had to collect it. Like someone picking up pieces of broken glass, I collected every piece of evidence. Photos, schedules, receipts. The web he'd woven was turning against him, strand by strand. My mind was no longer the same. Fear had given way to a calculated calm. I woke up and thought about each step as if I were on a mission. I no longer saw myself as a victim. I was a hunter. And the prey, still unaware, was sleeping beside me every night. There was a day when I nearly broke down. Seeing an old photo of us on a trip, I felt my chest tighten. His smile back then seemed genuine, and the question gnawed at me. When did everything change? But I couldn't allow myself to falter. The past no longer mattered. What mattered was the end of the charade. I began to notice details that would have previously gone unnoticed. The feminine perfume in the car, the smell of cigarettes on his clothes, and he never smoked. The late-night messages, the selective fatigue when he was home. Everything connected, forming a complete picture. And I knew. He was giving himself away without realizing it. The most ironic thing was how he underestimated my intelligence. He believed I was blind, naive, distracted. Little did he know that each lie fueled my determination. He laughed to himself, and I smiled silently, knowing the end was closer than he imagined. My lonely nights became moments of strategy. I planned lines, imagined confrontation scenarios, rehearsed even the tone of my voice. I didn't want to improvise. I wanted each word to be a sharp blade, cutting through any excuse. The betrayal wouldn't be hidden behind cheap excuses. It would be laid bare before him, naked and raw. His confidence was proof of his own downfall. Those who believe they'll never be caught become careless. And that's exactly what happened. One day, I saw a hotel notification on his credit card statement. The detail he'd forgotten to erase. I smiled bitterly, because that piece of paper was worth more than 1,000 arguments. I was no longer afraid to face the truth. With each test, I felt stronger, more prepared. The woman who once remained silent in the face of excuses now wielded invisible weapons. It wasn't just the pain that drove me, it was the certainty that I was about to rewrite my story. And the further I went, the more I felt the climax approaching. The betrayal was no longer just a secret between us. It was a sandcastle about to crumble. I just needed to choose the right moment to push. And when I did, he'd never be able to rebuild. Because the truth doesn't hide forever. It emerges, explodes, rips off masks, and shatters facades. And I was ready to light the fuse that would bring it all crashing down. He thought he was deceiving me, but he didn't imagine I'd already seen far beyond the lies. The final blow was about to happen. That morning, I woke with the feeling that something grand was about to happen. The silence in the house felt heavier, as if the walls carried the weight of secrets. As I made coffee, I observed the details of the kitchen that had so often served as the backdrop for our conversations. Now, it was just a stage for a fake play. I didn't want to pretend anymore. He came down the stairs smiling, cell phone in hand. He feigned fatigue, ordered coffee, and began talking about a supposedly important meeting. I watched him calmly, noticing every gesture, every pause. I was no longer her husband, but an actor trying to sustain a lie. And I, sitting across from him, was the coldest audience he'd ever faced. I decided to accompany him that day. I waited for him to leave the house, waited a few minutes, and then got in my car. My heart was pounding, but my hands were firm on the steering wheel. I followed discreetly, keeping my distance. Every turn seemed to prolong the tension consuming me. I knew something unexpected awaited me. He parked in front of a hotel, a discreet spot, far from our routine, almost invisible to anyone not paying attention. I watched from afar, and my stomach churned. I saw her arrive, the two of them smiling like teenagers in love. The hug was brief, but the complicity was impossible to deny. I felt my body freeze, but I didn't lose focus. I took out my cell phone and recorded the scene. Photos, videos, schedules, everything duly stored. The betrayal now had a face, a location, and irrefutable evidence. There was no denying it. He was exposed, even if he didn't know it yet. I waited a few minutes before leaving. The drive back seemed endless, and every kilometer was filled with memories. I wondered when that man had become so cold. It was impossible to associate the image of him holding hands with another woman, with the partner who shared years of my life. At home, I sat in the dark living room and let the tears finally flow. It wasn't just pain, it was also indignation. I deserved better than that. I deserved respect. But along with the tears, an unshakable strength was born. A certainty that I wouldn't let that story end with me in silence. In the following days, my outlook changed. There was no longer room for naivety, only for strategy. I began recording everything: calls, messages, suspicious outings. With every detail, I strengthened my arsenal. He thought he had control, but I already held the strongest cards in the game. The cruelest thing was his naturalness. He'd come home, lie down next to me, and kiss me on the forehead as if nothing had happened. I pretended to sleep, but my mind worked tirelessly. It was a well-rehearsed performance, but I knew the play was about to end. The audience would see the end, and it wasn't prepared. My life became a sequence of intense scenes: the breakfast shared with lies, the hurried exits, the smiles hidden in my cell phone. Everything fueled the fury I held back. But along with the anger, grew calm. I no longer reacted impulsively. I calculated. And coldness was my greatest weapon. I decided to share some of the evidence with a trusted friend. She was shocked, but she gave me strength. She told me I needed to think about myself, about my dignity. Her words echoed like a hammer in my mind. You can't keep quiet. That gave me even more courage to plan every detail of what was to come. I didn't just want to confront, I wanted to expose, making everyone see the man behind the mask. He wasn't just a traitor, he was a fraud. And frauds, sooner or later, are revealed. The difference is that now I would be the one to create the final show. While he laughed in side conversations, I was already rehearsing the moment of revelation. I thought about how to show each piece of evidence, how to destroy each lie. His silence fueled me, because I knew that the greater his confidence, the greater the fall. And I was ready to push. With each day, my coldness grew. There were no more tears, only strategy. I watched him from afar, like someone analyzing an enemy. The man I once loved no longer existed. Only an imposter remained, and I was no longer afraid of him. Fear had turned to controlled fury. I began to notice signs that he was no longer so careful. He left clothes forgotten in the car, poorly explained schedules, flimsy alibis. Arrogance made him relax, and it was precisely this carelessness that I expected. Each mistake he made was one less brick in the wall he was trying to hold up. One night, he fell asleep on the couch with his phone beside him. I seized the opportunity and grabbed the device. An exchange of short messages appeared on the screen. Laughter, hearts, scheduled meetings. I photographed everything, without hesitation. There was no more room for doubt. It was the definitive end of excuses. I closed the phone and returned to the bedroom, my heart racing. I looked at him lying there, breathing deeply as if he were innocent. I felt a mixture of disgust and pity. Pity for not realizing that the life he knew was about to crumble, and disgust for forcing myself to live so many years alongside a lie. The next morning, I looked in the mirror and almost didn't recognize the woman in the mirror. Her red eyes now held a gleam of determination. Her tired face hid a strength I never imagined I possessed. I was ready for war, a silent but devastating war. And in that moment, I realized there was no turning back. The confrontation wouldn't be just between me and him. It would be between truth and deception. And when that truth came to light, nothing would protect him. Not apologies, not tears, not pretenses. The tables were about to turn. I no longer carried just evidence. I carried ammunition, and every detail would be used with precision. Because the pain he caused me would not be buried in silence. It would be transformed into something greater, a reckoning that would mark the end of one era and the beginning of another. An era in which I would once again be my own master. The accumulation of evidence no longer fit solely in my phone's memory. I created a hidden folder on my computer, organizing screenshots, audio recordings, locations. Each file was like a fragment of my pain, but also like a brick building the wall of my strategy. I was no longer just a betrayed wife. I was the architect of a revelation. He, unknowingly, continued his private spectacle. He returned home as if he were the perfect husband, distributing smiles and rehearsed phrases. I watched him silently, and each false gesture fueled my determination. The lie no longer destroyed me, it strengthened me, because I knew every word would be used against him. I began to study his schedule with almost surgical attention. The pattern was always the same: late-night meetings, last-minute appointments, repeated delays. It was like watching a broken clock that still insisted on keeping time. And I, patient, wrote everything down, transforming his routine into a map of deception. One night, I decided to test my cool. I looked him in the eye and casually asked if he had plans later. He smiled and replied that he would be late at the office. Minutes later, I saw the message flashing on the screen. "I'm on my way, love." The irony was like poison, but it was also fuel. The hotel had become their refuge, and I knew it. So I decided to approach him once more. I waited outside, my heart racing, my hands freezing. And there they were, walking in together, as if they were a longtime couple. The scene was more painful than all the previous ones, but it was also the most revealing. At that moment, something inside me died. There was no longer any shred of hope left, no desire to believe in change. All that remained was the certainty that I needed to put a dignified end to this farce. And for the first time, I didn't cry. I felt a sharp chill run through my body, preparing me for the final decision. When I got home, I opened the evidence folder and stared at each image. It was like looking at an album of a parallel marriage built behind my back. With each photo, my indignation grew, and at the same time, a sense of power was born. Because he had no idea the strength I carried in my hands. I spent days in silence, analyzing the possible scenarios. I could confront him at home, alone, without witnesses. Or I could expose him to everyone, at work, with my family, on social media. The choice was cruel, but also liberating. I knew that either way there would be no going back. His silence, mixed with the lies, began to make me nauseous. I could no longer bear to hear his poorly rehearsed excuses. The mere sound of his voice irritated me, but I restrained myself, because I knew the impact would be greater if I let the rope stretch to its limit. And when it snapped, nothing could be hidden anymore. My friend insisted that I deserved justice, that I shouldn't remain silent, that I needed to show the world who he truly was. Her words echoed like hammer blows in my conscience, and I knew she was right. Silence was useful only until the right moment. After that, it would be cowardice. I began to rehearse in my mind the speech I would deliver. It wouldn't be an outpouring of pain, but a sentence. Short, sharp, relentless words. I wanted each sentence to be like a mirror, showing him who he truly was. And I wanted everyone around to see it too. There would be no room for pity. During those nights of preparation, I realized how I had changed. The woman who had once been silent now dominated silence. Fear had transformed into strength, and I finally recognized myself. No longer as a victim, but as the protagonist of my own story. The pain forged me into iron. The cruelest thing was seeing him act as if nothing had happened. He kissed my forehead, made travel plans, talked about the future, and every word fueled my indignation. It was unbelievable how he believed his own lie, but I already knew. This trust would be his downfall. I saw him laugh to himself, secretly reply to messages, overdress for trivial encounters, and I thought, keep going. Because his every gesture only reinforced the impact of what was to come. The fall would be greater precisely because he believed himself untouchable. And I was in no rush. Once, I almost betrayed myself with my emotions. I felt like throwing all the evidence on the table and screaming. But I took a deep breath and restrained myself. Because I understood that perfect revenge is built in the right time. And that time was getting closer and closer. I could feel it. At work, I feigned normalcy. Among colleagues, I smiled and participated in conversations. But inside, it was as if I carried dynamite in my pocket. One shot was enough to blow everything up. And this duality consumed me. But it also strengthened me. Because I knew the explosion was inevitable. Every lie he told was a reminder that I was on the right path. There were no more doubts, no more insecurities. I had everything I needed to turn things around. All that remained was to choose the stage for the revelation. And when I did, there wouldn't be enough of an audience to drown out the roar. At night, lying beside him, I imagined the look of surprise on his face when he saw everything laid bare. The mask would fall, and he would have no way to hide. This image gave me the strength to resist, because I knew I was about to witness the greatest spectacle of my life. Now it wasn't just a matter of betrayal, it was a matter of dignity. I needed to free myself. I needed to show that my pain would not be buried in silence. And when the time came, I wouldn't just emerge victorious. I would emerge free, stronger than ever. And as he slept peacefully beside me, imagining nothing, I had already decided the revelation was near, and it would be so impactful that it would change everything, forever. Because some truths cannot be hidden. They come to the surface like a whirlwind, sweeping everything in their path. And I was about to unleash that storm. The tension inside me was already unbearable. I woke every day feeling like I was on a countdown. His every smile, his every rehearsed word was like gasoline being poured on a fire about to explode. I no longer had patience for cheap excuses. The moment to tear the curtain was approaching. I began to plan meticulously where, when, and how to expose it. I wanted it to be devastating, not just a domestic confrontation. I wanted the truth to resonate, to be impossible to suppress. It wasn't enough to release myself in silence. I needed everyone to see what I saw, and that gave me even more courage. An idea began to grow in my mind. A family dinner, everyone gathered, him playing the role of the perfect husband. And then, at the height of the performance, I would reveal the truth. There would be no escape, no improvised excuses. It would be the moment the whole world would discover who he truly was. In the days that followed, I rehearsed every detail. I imagined the expression on his face, the piercing silence of those present, the shock etched in every glance. This thought kept me grounded, gave me the energy to endure the daily grind. It was like waiting for a play to premiere, but this time I was the director. Meanwhile, he remained relaxed, confident, completely oblivious. He laughed on his cell phone, exchanged secret messages, and left with poorly constructed excuses. He believed he was untouchable, that he had complete control of the situation. But little did he know that the rope was about to snap, and that I would be the one to pull hard. One night he arrived late, smelling of sweet perfume. I simply smiled and asked how the job had gone. He responded with some random story, so flimsy it bordered on ridiculous. I kept that fake smile inside me, like ammunition. Every detail prepared me for the final scene. I decided to record an audio recording. My own voice, steady, recording everything I knew, as if it were a silent confession, but in reverse, living proof of my conscience. I wanted to hear myself later, remember the strength I'd gained. The recording would be part of my arsenal, a reminder that I was no longer a hostage. I began observing mutual friends, noticing how he maintained his facade. He was respected, admired, seen as an example. This revolted me even more. Because while the world saw a man of integrity, I carried the weight of his lies. And soon, the whole world would know the truth. There was a night when I almost revealed everything. We were at a simple dinner, just the two of us. I looked into his eyes and felt the urge to throw all the evidence on the table. But I restrained myself. The impact would be too small. I wanted more. I wanted it to be unforgettable, a deep cut that would never heal. My friend, a silent accomplice, already knew about the plan. She encouraged me, told me I deserved justice, and warned me not to miss the right moment. He needs to fall in front of everyone, she repeated. And I knew she was right. Because the betrayal wasn't just against me, it was against all the trust he used as a shield. Time seemed to move slower. Each day was a rehearsal, each lie a preparation. I no longer saw my husband. I saw only an actor rehearsing his last lines before the play ended. And I, in the audience, had my finger ready to turn out the lights. The show was about to end. The cruelest thing was the contrast between his public and private image. In front of others, he was the perfect man. At home, he was just a shadow laden with secrets. This duality corroded me, but also strengthened me. Because I knew that when the truth came out, the impact would be even greater. I decided to store the evidence in more than one place. A hidden flash drive, an email sent to myself, copies on my friend's phone. I wouldn't take any risks. If anything happened, the truth would be protected. Nothing, absolutely nothing, could stop it from coming out. One afternoon, I sat alone in the living room and relived it all in my mind. His laughter on the live stream, the hotel, the messages, her name flashing on the screen. It was like watching a movie over and over again, but with a new ending each time. And the ending I planned would be unforgettable. He continued living his charade, imagining nothing. He bought cheap flowers, invented corporate dinners, promised trips that would never happen. I just watched, memorizing every detail. The power was no longer with him, it was with me. And he had no idea he had already lost the game. One night I dreamed of the scene. Everyone gathered, the silence piercing, him in shock. I woke up sweaty, but with a sense of victory. Because even in my dreams, I was already rehearsing liberation. And when even the unconscious conspires, it's a sign that the time is near. Deep down, a part of me still hurt. There was still the memory of the man I loved, of the plans we made together. But that part was small compared to the indignation. Love had been buried, and in its place something stronger was born, the need for justice. And justice would be served. The days dragged on, but each one was another preparation. I was in no rush. I knew the moment would come like an explosion, and there could be no mistakes. The stage was set, the audience was approaching, and I, steadfast, awaited the cue for the final scene. Now, it wasn't just a matter of revealing. It was a matter of marking it forever. I wanted him to remember that moment every day of his life, to never forget the instant his mask fell before everyone. And this certainty gave me the energy to carry on. And while he smiled, believing he'd fooled me once again, I smiled silently. Because I knew the game was about to end. The end was so close I could feel it in the air. And when it came, nothing would save him from the weight of the truth. Dinner was set. I myself suggested we invite family and close friends, like old times. He accepted immediately, perhaps to reinforce his image as the perfect husband. I watched his excitement coolly, knowing it would be the final stage of his performance. The audience was chosen, and the show was about to collapse. That week, I prepared everything with calculated calm. I made sure to choose every detail of the table, the food, the drinks. The impeccable organization wasn't just hospitality, it was part of my plan. Everything had to be perfect, because the fall would be even more devastating, and I wouldn't leave any room for improvisation. The days leading up to the meeting were torturous. He kept making the same excuses, the same lies. Late meeting, difficult client, chaotic traffic. I just listened and smiled, keeping everything to myself. My silence was poison, fueling his confidence to the limit. Little did I know I already had my cards up my sleeve. At work, I continued acting as if nothing was happening. My colleagues saw me smiling, dedicated, unaware of the internal storm. I learned to divide my masks, one for the world, one for home. But the one I prepared for dinner would be my last. After her, there would be no more disguises. The nights were the hardest. I lay beside him, listening to his calm breathing, and thought about every detail I discovered. It was like sleeping next to an intimate enemy. The physical closeness was unbearable, but at the same time necessary. It was the silence before the explosion. And I endured it because I knew what was coming. I decided to print some of the evidence. Photos, messages, location records. I put everything in an envelope, carefully tucked away. The weight of that paper felt like a brick in my hands, but it was also the key to my liberation. Each page was a silent scream that would soon echo before everyone. The night before dinner, I nearly collapsed. I sat in the dark living room and cried for the last time. It wasn't just for the betrayal, it was for the lost time, the tarnished memories, the stolen dreams. But when the tears dried, I awoke differently. It was as if I had buried the wounded woman and made way for the ruthless one. The day arrived. The house was full of voices, laughter, and crosstalk. I smiled, served, greeted, but inside my mind was focused. The clock seemed to tick slowly, each minute prolonging the tension. I knew that in a few hours, his life would change forever. He was at the peak of his powers. He cracked jokes, praised the food, and made travel plans in front of everyone. His public image shone, and I watched with contempt, because no one at that table knew the other side of him. But everyone would soon. With each glass raised, I felt my heart beat faster. It was as if fate were marking the countdown. My hands trembled slightly, but my eyes remained steady. I was no longer afraid. I only knew that the moment was near. I spoke to my friend, who looked at me knowingly. She knew what was about to happen. Her gaze was my silent support, my reminder that I was not alone. I took a deep breath and prepared myself. It was time to lift the veil of deception. When everyone settled down for the toast, I stood. I held the envelope in my hands and felt the weight of the world within. He looked at me confidently, as if I were simply thanking everyone for their presence. Little did he know I was about to shatter his charade under every watchful eye. My voice came out firm, despite the tension. I began speaking about trust, about respect, about the years of partnership. I saw smiles of approval and agreement on the faces around me. He smiled too, believing I was talking about him. The taste of irony burned in my mouth. Then I opened the envelope and spread the evidence on the table. Photos, messages, hotel records. The silence was instantaneous, suffocating. I saw the shocked faces, the half-open mouths. And in the center of it all, his gaze crumbling, as if the ground had dropped beneath his feet. He tried to speak, but couldn't. The words died in his throat. The embarrassment was absolute. The mask had fallen all at once, and there was no way to put the pieces back together. The entire room now knew the traitor, not the perfect husband. And I finally breathed a sigh of relief. The reactions were varied. Some family members looked away, others stared at me in silence, shocked. My friend held my hand firmly under the table, as a reminder that I wasn't alone. And he, pale, desperately searched for a way out. But there was no way out. The weight of the evidence spoke for itself. They weren't assumptions. They weren't empty accusations. They were facts, indisputable, cruel. He was naked before everyone, defenseless, without shields. And for the first time, I saw him as small. A man who had always thought himself great, reduced to nothingness. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't make a scene. I just let the silence speak. Because sometimes silence is more cutting than 1,000 words. And in that moment, he carried the full weight of shame. I just watched, with the coldness of someone who had finally won. He tried to justify himself, stammered excuses, spoke of misunderstandings. But no one believed him. The looks were of disapproval, of disappointment. His image was destroyed. With each poorly worded word, he sank deeper. And I remained standing, firm, like the owner of the truth. The mood of the evening changed drastically. The conversation ceased, the laughter disappeared. Only the weight of the revelation remained. I, who had once been a victim, was now the voice of truth, and he, who had once been the center of attention, was now just an exposed man. I left the room for a few minutes, took a deep breath, and looked at my reflection in the mirror. For the first time in a long time, I saw a strong woman, intact despite her wounds. I had weathered the storm and was standing, and that reassured me that nothing could destroy me anymore. I returned to the table and surveyed the scene. He was hunched over, embarrassed, sweating cold. Everyone avoided meeting his eyes. The silence still echoed, heavy, uncomfortable. But for me, it was liberating. Because that silence was no longer mine. It was his. In that moment, I understood that revenge wasn't just against him. It was against all the years I'd been made to believe lies, against every night I doubted myself. It was a personal, intimate, profound revenge, and I was finally at peace. The next few hours were confusing, filled with tension. Some tried to change the subject. Others withdrew in silence. He tried to follow me, to talk to me, but I wouldn't let him. I just looked into his eyes and said, "Now everyone knows who you are." That was enough to silence him. After everyone left, the house fell into absolute silence. I sat in the living room, exhausted, but with a sense of victory. The weight had lifted from me. For the first time in a long time, I felt light. Because the truth sets you free, even when it hurts. He walked upstairs without looking back. Perhaps he still believed he could turn the situation around. But I knew there was no going back. The mask lay on the floor, broken into pieces that could never be put back together. And I had nothing left to lose. That night, I slept soundly. Sleep came like an embrace after years of insomnia. I didn't dream of him or of us. I dreamed of myself, free, walking alone, but at peace. It was as if my heart had finally found rest. In the following days, the repercussions began. Messages, phone calls, comments. The story was already spreading. The respected man was now the subject of whispers, veiled criticism, and sidelong glances. His perfect image had crumbled, and I was responsible for it. At work, he no longer held the same demeanor. Colleagues whispered. Superiors eyed him with suspicion. His credibility was ruined. What he valued most, his reputation, was in tatters. And I watched silently as he brought about his own self-destructive downfall. I didn't need to raise my voice or argue. The truth did all the work. And it was far crueler than any planned revenge. Because the truth, naked and raw, has the power to destroy more than 1,000 accusations. And I learned to use that power with precision. He still tried to approach me, to ask for forgiveness, to plead remorse. But it was too late. I no longer had room for excuses. What had once been love was now just ashes. And no one revives ashes. It was the end, and I accepted it calmly. The world may grow accustomed to lies, but it cannot survive exposed truths. And he was now proof of that. A man destroyed not by my fury, but by his own choices. And that was the greatest lesson I could teach him, that every lie has an expiration date. I knew there were still consequences to come. Legal, social, familial. The impact would linger, echoing for weeks, months. But I no longer cared, because my liberation had already happened. The rest was just a natural consequence. And as I walked through the house, looking at every corner that had once been the scene of lies, I felt a strange peace. The war was over. I had won. And now, a new chapter was approaching, bringing even greater challenges. But I was ready. After the revelation, the days passed in a strange silence. Not the silence of before, fraught with distrust, but a new silence, one of rebuilding. The house felt empty, as if the echo of the lies had finally died away. Walking through the rooms was painful, but also liberating. Every wall seemed to give me back the voice I'd lost. He tried to reach out to me several times. Long messages, pleas for forgiveness, justifications that were nothing more than excuses. I read them without emotion, like someone analyzing old reports. Nothing in those words could erase the scene everyone had witnessed, and nothing could erase the strength that had been born within me. On the street, the looks were different. Some of pity, some of admiration, some of judgment. But I walked upright, with my head held high, because I knew I was no longer the betrayed woman in silence. I was the woman who transformed her pain into liberation, and no one could take that away from me. I realized over time that my pain wasn't just personal, it was also collective. How many women still live trapped in sham relationships, swallowing lies to keep up appearances? How many still remain silent for fear of judgment? This realization ignited me and made me want to go beyond my own story. The evidence I exposed wasn't just against him. It was against all men who believe their lies can last forever, against all the social masks that hide lies behind smiles. My personal revenge became a universal cry, a reminder that truth always finds a way. I also learned to look at myself with more compassion. I no longer blame myself for the signs I ignored. I understood that trust wasn't weakness, it was proof of my character. The weakness was always there, in the inability to honor my word, in the cowardice of betraying instead of confronting. This clarity healed parts of me I thought would never recover. At work, my posture changed. I no longer accepted being diminished or underestimated. I looked everyone in the eye firmly, and this generated respect. I discovered that pain can forge silent leaders, and that when a woman rebuilds herself, the world learns to see her differently. The days of solitude were inevitable. At night, the weight of the empty bed still pressed against my chest. But soon I realized that the emptiness wasn't absence. It was space. Space for new possibilities, for new beginnings. And I began to love this space. Because in him, I found myself again. Family and friends still talked about dinner, some with shock, others with praise for my courage. I listened and smiled, but deep down I knew no one could fully understand. Courage wasn't born of pride, but of necessity. Because when pain surpasses its limit, the only way out is to explode the truth. He, in turn, faced social ruin. Friends distanced themselves. Colleagues became suspicious. Family avoided contact. Everything he'd built in public image crumbled in a matter of minutes. And I didn't have to do anything but show what already existed. This was the greatest triumph. I let reality itself destroy him. I began writing in a journal, recording every reflection. It was my way of sorting through the internal debris. On each page, a discovery about myself. I discovered that pain is not an enemy, it is a guide. It points out what needs to be rebuilt, what needs to be abandoned. And in this process, I reinvented myself. I began to take better care of myself. I resumed forgotten hobbies. I allowed myself new places, new people. Not to fill a void, but to rediscover myself. Every small gesture was like a brick rebuilding the woman he tried to erase. And every day, I felt more whole. Society tends to judge women who expose cheating. They say it's revenge, that it's an exaggeration. But no one talks about the weight we carry in silence. No one understands the sleepless nights, the doubts that gnaw at us, the loneliness within a marriage. My choice was to show the truth, and I don't regret it. I started receiving messages from unknown women. They said my courage inspired them. They told their own stories, many of them still trapped in the cycle of lies. And I understood. My pain had turned into collective strength. My voice was now an echo of the voices of many. He still tries to justify himself, saying it was a mistake. But I know it wasn't. This is not a moment, but a pattern, a repeated, conscious choice. And when betrayal is a choice, there is no forgiveness that can erase it. There is only the inevitable consequence. Today, I look back and see two versions of myself. The woman who believed in empty promises, and the woman who showed the world the truth. Between them, there is an abyss of pain. But there is also the bridge of overcoming. And I chose to cross. I chose not to side with illusion. My days now have a different rhythm. Lighter, more mine. With each dawn, I feel like I find myself a little more. The weight of betrayal still hurts, but it doesn't define me. What defines me is the strength of not being silent, of having transformed shame into courage. That's the brand I want to carry. And every time I think about everything that happened, I wonder, how many are still trapped in stories like mine? How many still prefer to remain silent, out of fear, out of convenience, out of misinterpreted love? This is the reflection that accompanies me. And it makes me want to move forward, not just for myself, but for all of us. Now the question echoes in my mind, and I want it to echo in you. What if it were you? What would you do? Would you remain silent in the face of pain, or transform your story into liberation? How many more lies would you accept before you decide enough is enough? This answer is not just mine. It belongs to everyone who carries suffocating secrets. Because the truth has the power to heal, but also to destroy. And I chose to let her destroy what killed me in silence, to finally heal me. But there was still something bigger to be faced, something that went beyond intimacy and reached the collective. And this battle was just beginning.